Four Carrow Road games, four Carrow Road defeats for Norwich City. Not the start of the season Liam Manning or any of those Norwich City players had hoped for. A 3-2 defeat to Wrexham, newly promoted, Hollywood and all, asks fresh questions about where this group are and, more importantly, where they're going. Welcome to this week's edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast. I'm your host, Connor Southwell, joined by Paddy, Davitt to my left and Samuel Seaman to my right. We've made the trip up the hill from Carrow Road after this afternoon's game. Paddy, it feels like over the last few years we've sat down and we've done a lot of these podcasts, and it's been post-mortems of poor days at Carrow Road and bad defeats, maybe even away from home, maybe not necessarily in this particular room. It's now 1 win in 10 at Carrow Road for Norwich City, spanning 2 seasons. That came against a Cardiff team that were already relegated. They've lost all 4 of their games this season. This is, let's jump into it two-footed. This is not where anyone thought they'd be at this stage.
No, it's diabolical, the Carrow Road element of it, and we'll unpack it in due course or attempt to do that. But now I don't think will be enough. It is so far removed from externally, internally. This has been badged, which is a season of top 6 assault. You might fall short, but it's certainly that this would be a group under a head coach who, not all that long ago, got a Bristol team into the top 6, could be equipped after an initial period maybe of adaptation, certainly with the volume of new players who've come through the door, that stick with us, and the light will be there at the end of the tunnel, and then back end of this season into the turn of the new year, it will come together, and let's see how it plays out. Well, if that is going to be the case, it's going to come from a pretty low level, because today, again, was probably the worst example of a Carrow Road fan base who've had to sit through a performance from a group of players moulded by a head coach and his coaching team that looks so far removed from being any of those things in terms of top 6 material. And we did the team news before the game, so don't seek to be wise after the event. But we said it needed to come pretty swiftly, and today would be a good opportunity to start to change the narrative and turn it from works in progress and process and needing time to build relationships and all those things, the out of possession, the in possession challenges. But to be honest, today was just a continuation of the theme, really, and it's a regressive trend, really. If you go back to first half against Watford in the League Cup at Vicarage Road, the first half at Portsmouth, even the first half at Blackburn, and then what's been served up since, this is going in a regressive direction rather than what you'd hoped with more time on the training pitch. Yes, I know they had an international period to navigate with players scattered far and wide, but still, I think it's more than reasonable to expect now, if you're a Norwich fan who've turned up for the first 4 games at Carrow Road, to see that now, game day 4, the reaction entirely understandable, and and also tellingly, Liam Manning's demeanour and what he said in the post-match. He's angry, he's frustrated, he's hurt, he's questioning those players now publicly. So it's got to that point already far too swiftly, and I don't think anybody would have expected it to get to this point at this stage. And of course, it's still very early and plenty of time to turn it around. But as I say, to repeat what I've just said, every metric that you look at is going in the opposite direction. And dare one say, to draw a pertinent parallel, Torop got bulleted because the metrics were going in the wrong direction. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not sat here talking about Liam Manning's time is up. That would be frankly ridiculous. But the fact that we even have to countenance this tone of conversation now moving forward around him, around the players, around Ben Napper, who, as we said to him in the summer, you invested a lot of your own personal capital in Johannes Torop's appointment. That failed spectacularly. So, how much credit has he got in the bank, having gone to Liam Manning? And at this stage, looking like another major work in progress and transition, which we were very much told wasn't going to be the benchmark this time around. So, while we're just sat here in a matter of an hour or 2 after the final whistle, and things are still probably a little bit raw, and it will settle in the days ahead, I'm sure. You cannot disregard that over the entirety of Liam Manning's Norwich thus far, it's not going in the direction we expected it to go or anybody would have hoped it to go. So if that is the case, you have to take a step back and, as Liam said in his post-match, almost strip it back to basics. Sit down with these players now over the next few days, try and get some common ground in terms of what the players understand they're being asked to do, what the coaches are trying to get the players to do, and reach a position which actually looks like a football team rather than what it is at the minute, which I'm afraid to say is a rabble.
Yep, absolutely. And Sam, I mean, let's start. We'll come on to Liam Manning and what he said about that group of players in a moment. But let's start with the Carrow Road factor, because obviously Southampton in the League Cup you throw in there, which was a bad night as well. But you look at the games that they've played: Millwall, Middlesbrough, Southampton, Wrexham today. And I think in all 4 games they were probably second best and deserve to lose them all. It's maybe you could make an argument for. They played all right with 10 men against Middlesbrough. They maybe could have got a point against Millwall. I think they were edged out in both of those games. Marginal, yes, but they were still second best. That's a really concerning trend. But today, clearly, because of the way Wrexham have started, because of the changes that they've had this season, because of their own form, they were beaten 3-1 by QPR last week. They'd won once prior to coming here, which was away at Millwall, to be fair. All of that, as Paddy said, is regressive. It's not what you want in terms of the Carrow Road factor. I mean, we spoke about it on the way in. If you're how much the season tickets cost, and they're expensive, but if you're a non-season ticket fan today, you've paid £37 to attend that game. It's I think, and again, this is why, and Paddy said it there, for talk of transitions and patience. Fans have had 4 years of this. This is the 4th year of this, of Championship football, of it being mediocre. It's not a great way to kind of start and introduce yourself if you're a Liam Manning, or if you're one of these group of players that arrived in the summer.
No, and you could tell the sense of fury there was really upon the final whistle. There was booing after, I think, the second and third goals, as well as pretty strong booing. On the final whistle, there were obviously from small pockets of the crowd, to be fair, but chants against Liam Manning and sort of calling on Liam Manning to sort it out, I think, was the chant. And certainly that's not helpful at this stage of things, and you really don't want that atmosphere at your home ground. But can you really blame those fans? Because I think when I look at almost the tinderbox that Carrow Road has been for a while now, it's not just these 4 games, woeful as they've been. It's 4 years of being in the Championship, which Norwich fans aren't used to, and they haven't seen it since 2009. This long a spell in the Championship, so they expect much more. I think for the reasons of those prices that you outlined, the historical expectations of this club, and also the fact that under Ben Napper and in this kind of era, they've spent 60 million plus on transfers. Yes, they've brought in a decent amount from player sales, but we've seen them win the league before with squads assembled on a shoestring budget. All of the kind of metrics for expectation are hinting at a club that should be right towards the top end of the Championship. I'm sure those fans are paying much more than your average mid-table Championship club. I'm sure that squad costs much more and probably is earning more than your average mid-table Championship club as well. So when you put that much money into it, when you convey those messages that Paddy referenced, in terms of this being the end of transition and patience and waiting, as it was for a huge chunk of last season, and when that's the clear ambition, what other reception could there possibly be to 4 consecutive home losses to start the season? I think that response was probably justified, and that's why, if given the choice between good home form and good away form, you'd probably choose good home form, because 23,000 of those fans in the stadium today probably haven't seen any of these away performances in person. They haven't had those joyful away days that a small pocket of fans will have felt. They've waited 3.5 weeks to watch their team play football. They haven't got the result, and even worse than that, they've got a performance that might have eked out a couple of goals, but only really looked like a decent one for probably 25 minutes at the end of the first half. So I think it was the kind of afternoon that probably made people despair, not only about the performance and the result today, but to well, to look at the bigger picture, both in the past and in the future. And I think there will be a lot of fans sitting there wondering how much longer they're going to have to wait to kind of bring back the good old days, because the era of yo-yoing and that kind of cliche is certainly well gone now, and they're in the same bracket as all of those Championship clubs who have circled that plug hole of the Championship for a long time and got used to just playing in the second division. And I think that's kind of the problem. So yeah, when you have an afternoon like this and it's the fourth one out of 4 this season, that's when the problems start to come and when the mood starts to feel as bad as it does at the moment. Because if they'd been, if you swap the away and home form, yes, it would be inconsistent and it wouldn't be perfect, but you wouldn't have 20,000 Norwich fans sat there going, they've paid a certain amount for their season ticket, they've paid a certain amount to see these games, and they haven't seen a good performance or a win or even a draw just yet. So I think a lot of problems from today, and probably a lot of them come from the fact that it's at home.
I have to say, I think you're being generous for 25 minutes that they were good for.
Maybe, yeah.
But yeah, I understand the point that you're making. I think it's difficult, particularly when you're this close to a game, Paddy. You don't want to, particularly when you do what we do. I think you want to be mindful of kind of what you say and what you convey, and also sometimes the ramifications of. Ramifications is strong, but I don't think we ever want to say stuff that maybe in 48 hours' time would feel sensationalist, or I'd want to look back on personally and think maybe I shouldn't have said it in that way. And this is why I'm going to put it to you as a question, because I feel now, and I can only convey how I feel now. I can't convey how I'm going to feel on Monday or Tuesday, which could be different. But I feel quite worried about this Norwich team at this moment in time. I think you mapped it out there. I think barring. Maybe 45 minutes in the cup at Watford, 45 minutes at Portsmouth, and maybe 45 minutes at Blackburn. I'm really struggling with where they're at and what they're good at. I don't really see a team that defends particularly well. I was a little bit perplexed, to be honest, by some of the stuff that came out post game last week of how brilliant they are defensively. And I think it was more, to be fair to people, a comment of how good their last-ditch defending and goalkeeping was. The question I would have in response to that is, why are they having to do so much last-ditch defending, and why is their goalkeeper having to bail them out so much? Probably because they're not that great defensively, would be my argument. In possession, I'm really struggling with them at the moment. I don't see any patterns of play or any structure to what they're trying to do or attack. I don't see anything in terms of pressing. I think there was some green shoots, to be fair, heading into that international break, but since they've come back, I think they've regressed on that front. I think they defend set pieces quite well. Maybe that's the element that we're looking at, but they don't look particularly potent in terms of attacking them. I don't know. Am I being sensationalist? Is there more there that we can grasp onto? Because I'm just really not seeing what this group is offering at the moment in terms of any facet of the game beyond they've got a good goalkeeper. Their last-ditch defending is okay, and they've got an excellent striker. But when you're not creating any chances for him, he's had one today, I think, that I can think of, where he's had to take the ball into his own box into Wrexham's box, and the shot's been blocked in the first half. He's created that chance. Yeah. All of this is quite concerning from my perspective. So tell me if you think I'm being too sensationalist, or I'm being too emotional after the final whistle. But yeah, I'm concerned about where they're at the moment.
Well, you're more than in your rights to be emotional about these things. I mean, we're all sat here and we want them to do well, as always, personally and professionally. So it is a frustration. We feel it as well, but it's the fan base who, quite rightly, I think, expressed that dissatisfaction at the final. So not all of them. I'm sure there was a few claps, in fact, as well. Not sure what they were clapping for, really, on the evidence of that, but there you go. But, I mean, everything you say, I would agree. I'd be inclined to agree with. I just think, and it's not because it's my team, primarily, but that was the most recent game. You see that Coventry team, see how cohesive they were, and I'm talking here primarily about in control of the ball, possession, the structure, the players seemed to fit the structure, what Lampard wanted them to do. They all understood their roles, and okay, what Liam said pre and post match does hang true. That's a team who've been in a development cycle a lot longer than Norwich. Lampard came in for Mark Robins last season, but a lot of those players were there last season. They only had a very minor transfer window this time around. All of that isn't the case here. So you do cut Norwich, for me, a little bit more slack and a little bit more leeway. But still, the gulf in terms of the two structures and the two strategies, that's the alarming thing. I think there's a right and an expectancy with the grade of player we've been told they've recruited this summer, with a head coach who understands what it takes to get a team into the top six, to feel that Norwich will be further along this path in the facet of controlling the ball, which, if you've got anything about you in terms of wanting to get anywhere near the top six, it's not enough to go and Alamo job your way to the top six. That's not going to happen out of possession. You're going to have to be better, more control, better in terms of creating chances, and then more clinical to take those chances. And for all of that, you need a pattern of play and something that, even if it was a work in progress at this stage of the season, you could still point to and say, well, I can see what they're trying to do. It's not coming off all the time, and maybe some of the players aren't in necessarily the right positions, and he might need to change some of the personnel. But overall, you can see what they're trying to build. I don't think you can realistically say we can see that. And then when you compare it with the teams who you are probably going to have to fight it out with to get into the top six, i.e. Coventry, i.e. Middlesbrough. Well, to a degree, yeah, but certainly those are the two. They're way off it. They're way off it. There's no sense of any cohesive approach from Norwich in possession. That, for me, is, if we're going to drill right down into what is the issue here at the moment, that is the fundamental issue for me. And that obviously then brings in units in terms of the midfield setup and the attacking players, but also personnel within those units. It just feels so disjointed and almost playing off the hoof and off the cuff. And then, of course, when, as happened in the 15 minutes after half-time today, some of the reliable elements in these first games, i.e. the defensive resolve, when that completely frays at the edges and they get picked off as easy as they did, then it just compounds the sense that in possession they're nowhere near good enough, and then out of possession they're nowhere near good enough on a consistent basis. So there's so much to unpick that I think your initial emotional feel is not misplaced. Because I'm sure there's a lot of Norwich fans who've gone home tonight and will feel in the same space. Certainly the ones who've only seen them at home is like, how do you get from this to what we've been told this season is going to be about, which is a realistic attempt on the top six?
I'll just come in on that cohesion point, because I thought today was actually kind of the perfect example of maybe why that's not, the only thing to blame for Norwich. Or, well, you can blame the lack of cohesion.
You're going to mention Rexom, aren't you? Which is the point I was going to put to you.
Yeah, they made 13 signings this summer. Norwich made 12. So Wrexham have seen even more overhaul. You look at their team today. Callum Doyle, obviously not a great afternoon for him, but he's a new signing. Kiefer Moore up front, one of their better players today, new signing. Windass, 2 goals, new signing. Ben Sheaf in midfield was a new signing. Dom Hyam at centre-back is a new signing. Yeah, Moore.
O'Brien,
but so much of their team were new today, and I spoke to a Wrexham fan in the lead up for Terrace Talk, and he said they're still kind of getting to know each other, and that bonding is still happening. So if they're going to get way better as a result of playing together, well, I mean, how bad do Norwich look at the moment? Because they, as I said, they made fewer signings this summer than Wrexham. So maybe you can say, you look at the sort of business they did, you can say that it's a lack of championship experience and that it's a lot of those players taking time to go from other European leagues to the championship. But Norwich have spent a similar amount of money to Wrexham. You buy players because you think they're good enough to come in and perform. Maybe that excuse would be valid a few years ago when Norwich were having to sign players from the second division in Germany and lower than that for hundreds of thousands of pounds, because ultimately they thought they could be championship players, but they would take time to adapt. I think when you're signing an Ante Ciernats for 8.5 million, Matej Jurasek for nearly 6 million, I mean, there are countless examples. Topic, yeah. Pelle Matson cost 2.7 million, which is less than a lot of those players, but by some championship standards, a lot of clubs would be shocked to see that, to sign a player for that amount of money. And I just think, we can let them off the hook for that, but ultimately, why does Ante Ciernats cost 8.5 million if he needs time to adapt? Because you can go and get someone, like I said, there are talented players in the second and third divisions in Spain and Germany and France that probably have the talent to go and do well in the championship, but only cost 1 million because they need that time to adapt. So I think, there's that adaptation point, and then there's the cohesion where we talk about things and say Norwich signed 12 players, they got a new head coach. They played a team today that I thought actually looked pretty together, looked like they had a real tactical plan where you could tell what they were trying to do in different phases of the game. They exploited weaknesses that Norwich had, and they found ways to do that. Even Jose Cordoba, they had no way of knowing that he was going to play at left back. There were a few different solutions that Norwich could have used for the game today, but in game, Phil Parkinson and the players that he had on the pitch found a way to exploit that weakness on the Norwich left-hand side, and they used it over and over and over again until it got them 2 goals in the end. So I think Wrexham proved that you can have a load of new players and you can still have a cohesive unit that Norwich don't have. So whether it's more work on the training pitch, on that in possession side of things, whether it's, I don't know, I saw the Russell Martin thing that he did with Rangers players and going and swimming in a lot.
To Whitlingham maybe.
Yeah. Go and do that, go and have a dip in there. Whatever it is, clearly they're not managing to meld those players together as well as other clubs are. So yeah, I think they were showing today that that's not the excuse, and that's not the explanation for all of their weaknesses this season, because it can be done.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the thing, Paddy, when you drill into it, and we'll get on to what Liam Manning said in the second half of the show, but it felt today like Norwich had too many players in that team. Some of them new who'd signed this summer, some of them who'd signed last summer, some beyond that they were carrying, really. And I think to maybe summarise what this game was, or maybe what it wasn't for Norwich City's perspective, they've conceded 3 goals at home. They've been... the scoreline's closer than the game was for me, and we're walking away going Vladan Kovacevic was their man of the match in terms of the saves that he made. One from Lewis O'Brien in the second half that looked a cert goal. There was Josh Windass hit the post. There was a couple of one-on-ones that he denied Kiefer Moore, who I think Kiefer Moore's a good player at what he does, but he's not someone who's dynamic and wants to run in behind. Yet look how many times he got in behind Norwich this afternoon. It's not a good play. It's not a good place to be, where you're kind of walking away with your goalkeeper claiming man of the matches, having been absolutely peppered again.
No, and he made some excellent saves. I mean, I've said it on our TikTok channel. There was one there, it was left hand. That's as good a save as I've seen at Carrow Road in many a year. It was an excellent agile reflex stop. But yeah, I mean, it cuts to the point we made earlier. If your goalkeeper is having to produce that level of shot stopping every week, then structurally, and in the players in front of him, primarily in the back 4, back 3, back 5, whatever takes your fancy, are not performing. Liam Manning does have a reputation within the game as being a very astute, very sharp operator. He must know when he turns the lights off and goes to bed of an evening at the moment that things aren't functioning as they need to function. As somebody who knows what it takes, keep repeating, but what he pulled off with that Bristol squad was a very, very good coaching achievement, because I don't think the sum of those parts of that team, with the greatest respect to the Bristol squad and side, were probably necessarily top 6 material. So that, for me, is a tick in his coaching portfolio. But which is why when he came in the summer, even though he had to deal with the overhang from the Torop era and then quite an aggressive transfer turnover of the squad, by this stage you would have expected him and his coaching staff to have put some identity into this group, and the reality is that isn't the case. And
just green shoots, something to hold on to or cling on to, and it's just
there have been those, haven't they? I mean, there have been at Watford. We've said it on this podcast, and numerous. There have been 25-minute clumps, 45-minute clumps at a push in some of these games, and that's fine in terms of this process of discovery that everybody's on, whether it's players, new players, old players, and a new coach. I mean, like he referenced about Jacob Wright. Jacob Wright has had to come in as a young player and then adapt to Yanis Torop, and then he gets a new head coach, and all the experiences that he has to take on board there, and adapting to new demands that have been placed on him, and all of that is a given, and nobody would dispute that. But I repeat that they should be better than they are at the moment. There should be a clearer identity of what they're striving to achieve, how they intend to win games of Championship football, and I don't see it. And it's going the other way, which is the worrying trend. And then within that, and we're not going to dig out any individual, but there's too many who are performing way below the levels either that we have seen, albeit in smaller samples, or that we were told when they came in through not just this window but previous windows that they would be able to hit. So it's a bit of a toxic mix at the minute. You've got a group of players who aren't maybe being optimised to the maximum, and that's on players as much as it is on coaches. But equally, Liam Manning as a coaching staff, as he said after the game today, they need to go back to basics and maybe have a look and are they actually getting the right messages to these players? Do they actually understand what they're being asked to do? Because you see with each passing week of Championship football, and you walk away from these games and you're thinking, well, what have they spent that previous week at Colney doing? Because it doesn't look like they've discernibly nudged the dial further forward from where we were at Coventry. And that's a huge concern, because this sense that they were on a journey and a process and it would take time, that will only buy them time if there are those elements of light in amongst we can see it's not quite there at the minute, but we can see what they're trying to do. Nobody could tell me over the course of that 90 minutes we've witnessed today that there was any real positive elements or passages of play where you could actually walk away and think, well, the cards came on, the house fell in the start of the second half, but wasn't X, Y, and Z something to cling on to. There was nothing of that today. And if there isn't any positives to take, bar that they've got a keeper who can save some decent shots and keep the score down, then in very short order, this is going to reach a critical mass, sadly, for all those concerned at Carrow Road.
Yeah, and that's the thing, Sam, isn't it? Because probably the thing saving them at the moment is where we're at in the season, really, in terms of maybe how harshly people are going to judge this at the moment, because today was a bad one. And, in many ways different scoreline, but in the same way Portsmouth was a bad one, in the same way, we could go back and pick different results. It was bad today. And, the fact we kind of sat here, as we did post game, going, well, Matej Jurasek looked okay in patches, and that's kind of all you've got left to cling on to, isn't it? And that shouldn't be. Norwich shouldn't, irrespective of panning seasons or where they're at, they shouldn't be winning 1 in 10 at home at Championship level, and that's going to be the bit ultimately for fans, because as Paddy says, at the moment it is early. Things can change quickly. They do in this league. We've seen it before in terms of. Go back to that Wagner season when they were 17th in November and finished top 6. So you can get yourself on a run. You can change. It is repairable. And it hates me in modern. I hate modern football. I often joke with you guys. It always feels like there's 2 solutions to everything, which is sack a manager or sign a player. And actually, sometimes it is just time and work, and that kind of feels like we're where we are with Norwich at the moment. But as Paddy says, if we get. You look at the next 3 games, and even this feels madness to say it, really. But you look at Stoke, West Brom, Ipswich. That's a tough run of Championship games. Yeah. If God forbid they didn't win any of them all, and they go into that international break with that one of those defeats being Ipswich, it just doesn't bear thinking about, does it? But that kind of already feels where some people's heads are going to.
Well, yeah, this is the worry for me with the Ipswich game in particular, and obviously I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but. In that broader context that I've talked about in terms of why people seem to be unhappy, and sort of the longer term picture, and the fact that they're not used to being in the Championship for this long, you look at the only thing really, and it's kind of the same with Ipswich, and you can see why they're so desperate to beat Norwich, because it's the kind of the final thing they haven't ticked off in this remarkable rise of theirs over the last few years. They've now signed a Norwich City player. They've, a frontline player. They've been promoted to the Premier League. They've had double promotions. They've been kind of lauded by, national football outlets. But the one thing connecting them to that dreadful, almost, endless Championship run and that difficult period for them as a club is this run against Norwich City, which I think is partly why they're so desperate to get that win. And it's kind of the same for me in a reverse way for Norwich, because this in no way is really, apart from Kenny McLean, connected to the club that won Championship titles in 2019 and 2021. It's a far cry from the sort of Paul Lambert era of actually mounting a challenge to stay in the Premier League. But this run in the derby is a connection with those glory years that somehow they've managed to cling on to over the last few years. And for me, I don't think it's sensational to say that if they did lose to Ipswich, that would be the lowest point for the club since 2009 and since they were relegated to League One. So I think there is that looming pressure on the horizon. And actually, there was a little bit of a gulp from me when I thought, actually, they've only got 2 games now to build up a bit of momentum going into that quite tough away game, and obviously a huge game for them and for the mood. So I'm sure that's something that, whether they admit it or not, a few of the players and maybe Liam Manning are looking at the moment. But for me, one of the main concerns is that kind of gradual lowering of the bar, because you spoke about how we were kind of sat around going, yeah, your asset did okay, this player did okay, and although I don't blame him for it, because he was asked about them, and he was right. I agreed with his observation when Manning talked about Liam Gibbs and Oscar Schwartau coming on for the last few minutes and kind of just running around and putting themselves about a bit, which they did, but that's easy to do when you're 3-1 down, and ultimately it should be the absolute bottom line and the bare minimum to run around and to try everything you can to score a goal and to to do these things. And for me, that's how you go from being a Norwich City a few years ago, where they were almost like the Man United of the Championship, which maybe is an apt comparison, but they go from that scenario to then gradually to a stage where they've lost to a newly promoted Championship team, and we're talking about players who have come on in the last few minutes and just run around and just done the bare minimum for as footballers. And I actually did think they were some of Norwich's best players, so I don't think Manning was incorrect, but it's just what that says about this group and that type of performance at this stage that's kind of worrying. And it could be that obviously they get a couple of good results and things are turned around. And certainly if they won against West Brom and Stoke going into the Ipswich game, I'm sure people would be pretty confident that they would extend that Derby Day run. But in the wider context, it feels like that's increasingly important, and they do need to kind of get the mood going a little bit going into that one.
Yeah, it feels fragile at the minute, doesn't it? And on a little bit of a knife edge, because as you say, there's a reverse to this where next week they get a hell of a reaction and then they go and beat a Stoke team that lost today but have started very well. They go and beat West Brom at Carrow Road, get a result at Ipswich, and suddenly you go into that October international break and this was just a blemish really. And you look at the run of games either side of that and it looks vastly improved, but I just fear the performances more than the results at the moment, to be honest, in terms of where they're at. And I agree with what you said about those 3 players, because I'm sure you guys have as well. And I've been substituted into games at a very, very, very low level. When you're behind, and there's a freedom to it, isn't there? Because if you're 3-1 down at home, can't really make it any worse, particularly if you're an attacking player. So there can be a freedom that comes with that. But yeah, I agree. I think they did do well in that context. That's part 1 done. In part 2, we'll discuss some of Liam Manning's words. I think we'll look ahead to that Stoke game and try and chart a more positive course for where Norwich City find themselves at the moment. Join us in a moment. Welcome back to the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast, reflecting on a 4th straight Carrow Road defeat for the Canaries against Wrexham this afternoon. Hopefully planning to avoid a 13-minute collapse, which it was for Norwich City at the start of their own second half this afternoon. Hopefully that won't be the case. Paddy and Sam still with me to reflect and dissect on everything that unfolded today in NR1. Sadly feels like we are in post-mortem territory again, which it feels like we've been in far too regularly over the last 3 and a bit years. Paddy, you obviously spoke to Liam Manning after the game. It was, in his defence, I think sometimes managers and head coaches can come out and, for diplomatic reasons, and there's so much that they have to entertain in terms of upwards and the squads, and sometimes they're a little bit more diplomatic, particularly this early in the season. You can obviously speak through the first part of it where he sounded like he was quite strong, but I was in the room when, you asked him the question about whether he felt let down, which I remember you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you asked a similar one to Johannes after that Portsmouth game, and he didn't say he was. Liam today did say he was, which felt quite pointed, obviously, at that group of players. What did you make of everything that he said post-game?
Yeah, well, on that, he then followed up, which I thought was very telling. I mean, that in itself was a telling admission that he was quite happy to go public with that. That tells you, for me, the depth of his frustration, and not just on today, but maybe the way the trajectory has gone the other way for this portion of the season, because he went on to say that, his career and any success he's had in his coaching career has been achieved by, paraphrasing, grit, resilience, determination, and he wants to see those qualities and attributes in his team. He wants his team to be a representation of him and what he stands for, and by inference, he was saying he didn't get that from his group today. So that's, if I'm a player and I'm hearing that, then that's got to sting, surely. You've got to, now whether he's, as I said before, he's a very astute operator, whether that's now designed to almost be the first step in the post-mortem week ahead, and he puts that out there for his players to sit and stew and digest on it over the weekend, and then it's a bit of a, well, we'll show you then as they build into Stoke. Maybe. Time will tell on that one, but I'm not sure it was as calculating as that. I just think he was very heart on his sleeve in that press conference. His first reply, his first answer was anger and frustration and hurt that he felt at that performance. So, for me, it was probably more of quite a human response to how he was feeling, and he would be embarrassed by that, because that is a team in his image, producing what they did on that pitch, and it reflects poorly on him as much as it does on those players. So, I personally, if I was a fan, I'd rather see a head coach, and then if these poor lambs of footballers, if they get offended by that, as you often hear, and about you've got to keep these things in house, and this mythical losing the dressing room trope that always gets thrown about when a manager gets the bullet. I as a fan would rather that my head coach comes out and does put it up to those players. And it isn't, as you then went on to make it clear, it isn't an us and them. They're all in it together. They all have to come together now. Some tough talking to find a common position and a solution that involves all of them. So there was certainly no separation or looking to shift it all squarely at the door of his players. But equally, I think the players need to know the depth of his frustration. And you can be sure anything he said in that public setting will have been delivered behind closed doors after that game. And if not after the game, then certainly when they reconvene Sunday onwards. Because it strikes me that he certainly wouldn't go off half-cocked and convey messages that he hadn't said face-to-face to his playing staff. So they will know exactly where he feels. And, you'd like to think there's enough in that group in terms of the characters that they don't need to be told that. They know it isn't good enough. They know they're falling short. They know all those accusations that their head coach has levelled at them today are fair comment on this game, but also maybe over the course of this early part of the season. So, we don't want it to be a cliche, but we do hope there is a response, both as players and as a coaching staff, because if there isn't, and it continues to go in the opposite direction, then before push comes to shove, there will have to be changes, and that's the top and bottom of it, because I'm sure at the top of that football club now, the people in charge of it are not going to settle for this that's been served up at present, and their patience will only be finite, and they will only have a certain amount of understanding about this being a process. And for that reason alone, I'm sure Liam Manning and Ben Napper are well aware, acutely aware, that they need collectively and individually, with all the other people involved, find something that is far more appetising and pleasing on the eye than what they're serving up at the minute, which is, it's just nowhere near what we would have expected this season to start to look like from a Norwich perspective. And for that reason alone, I think to me, when I came away from that press conference, all of that frustration that he feels, not just today, but maybe the rest of this early part of the season, that's probably built to that public display from Liam Manning today, because that's certainly the first time he's gone to that extent. If anything, that's an outlier. Any other public messaging, even in the difficult games they've had, he's amped up the behaviours and the cultures and the response to adversity from his playing staff, called for patience, called for time to the fan base. But today, no, there was none of that. There was no real mitigation. He was very, very unhappy with what his team had produced, and let's see if that has the desired effect.
What did you make of it, Sam? You were in there as well. What did you make of that approach and those words from Liam Manning?
I was probably a little bit surprised, just because of kind of what we see from football managers at the moment, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because you can tend to get into kind of cliches quite readily with a lot of people in football at the moment. So in a way, I found it kind of refreshing. I agree with Paddy that it seemed to me like his genuine emotion. It might be that there was also a message in there, but I didn't feel that was, if that was the message, I didn't feel it was in contrast to what he was actually feeling. He looked like somebody who was all of the things that he said he was. He looked like somebody who was angry and frustrated and felt let down. And I think you obviously could say that at this stage of his tenure that maybe it is a little bit early to kind of to call out the players and to say that he feels let down by them, particularly when so many of them are kind of new to the club. But I think when you look at the way that it panned out with Johannes Torup, and by all accounts, that kind of cliche about losing the dressing room was broadly true with Torup, and there certainly wasn't that connection between him and the players that you'd want in a really successful team. I think when you look at the way that he did it, which was very analytical, very cool and calm, probably wouldn't have criticised his players publicly, even if he was absolutely raging with them in the dressing room. They didn't really seem to respond to that. So maybe if it's a similar group of players, obviously they have made a lot of changes, but a lot of those players remain the same from then and from the same group that maybe wasn't really enjoying Torup's style. Maybe they will respond to something a little bit more robust and a little bit more direct in public and kind of calling them out a little bit, because I think you can say that you shouldn't ever be calling out players in public, but they know exactly what the manager thinks. Even if the manager comes out and says, I've got to take full responsibility, and there are many factors that go into these sorts of things. No player watches that and goes, oh well, fair enough then, I suppose I'm kind of off the hook. The only thing it does for me when you come out and you say that is it waters down the message. So at any opportunity you have to kind of hammer home that message for those players, you've wasted when you come out into the press conference. And you can't do it every week. It's certainly something that needs to be done sparingly and needs to be done at the right moment. But after that kind of performance, if Manning had come out and told us he wasn't particularly upset and he felt that all of the players gave their best and there were no problems on that front, what would it really have done? It would have just been nothing. So I actually found it quite refreshing, and ultimately, obviously, we'll only be able to judge the success by what comes after it. But I think when you contrast it with what Torup did and how that panned out with the players and their reception of him, I think it's worth trying, because maybe they will respond to that.
Yeah, sometimes a rocket and to light things up in that way is the best way to go about it. I think it was Farker who used to talk about, you do things privately first. If you don't get any reaction, then you go public and try and do it that way, which always kind of, clearly it worked in terms of the results that he got at the football club, but very different group of players, admittedly. I mean, in terms of kind of his own self-reflections, Pad, what did you make in terms of, I guess, like you say, not having a team in his image? He will know ultimately he's ambitious. We know what his career path has been like, and you mentioned Bristol City. That's not an outlier. You look at Oxford, the 8 months or so that he was there, drastically improved them. MK Dons first year was excellent. Second year less so, but they lost a lot of key players, so there was mitigation in that. Even Lommel, there was improvement. So he's got a track record that Norwich have invested in terms of improving teams. But was there kind of reflection on where he's at and whether some of his messages or not were getting across?
Well, I did ask him that directly. Is it, your players aren't understanding what they're being asked to do in possession, out of possession, and in response, he, paraphrasing again, but it was kind of, my take was that he has had those conversations maybe with his coaching staff and his close confidants. Are they drilling the messages that they want? Are they going through to the players? Because the evidence clearly, whether that is or isn't happening, is what you see on the pitch, and they're so disjointed and so lacking in any pattern with the ball, that it must pose those questions. Do they actually understand what they're doing on a day-to-day basis? And I'm sure without, we're not privy to what sessions are getting put on and what have you. But if there is any lack of clarity, then he said in that answer they've got to go back to basics this week, and it's almost strip it back and start again, which of itself is a little bit concerning. That we're 5, 6, 7 games in, and we've reached the point where this isn't quite working. Let's almost turn the page, start with a blank sheet of paper again, and off we go. So, because you hope that if that is the case, then whatever hasn't been communicated or imparted from coach to player in the first period of the season, they can somehow find a solution, because there's no part of that looks anything like the two reference points I have is the Manning Bristol team that Norwich played last season. To go back to what I said earlier about how the identity that Coventry had when Norwich went there last week, Bristol had that under Manning. And I know he had far bigger period of time to get to that point. I think he came in halfway through the previous season, and that was his first full season last season. So understandably, he had longer to work with those players at Bristol. But there was an identity. You understood what they were trying to do. They were, the players within that template all clearly understood their roles, and it proved by the fact they got in the top six to be a successful approach. So you're right. You only have to look at his coaching path to feel that he will get to that point with Norwich. But I think if you've got him in a quieter moment, he would say he would have expected at this stage to be further along that path. Because as he said, at every point he's ever spoken about, we need time and it's a process. He's also said, but we still have to win games while we're doing this, and we still have to short-circuit the process. He's not under any illusions. He knows he's not going to get, as he said, when asked about Phil Parkinson, surprising. Well, now off the back of that result, but on his presser about Phil Parkinson being under pressure, supposedly. And he said, well, we understand we're in this precarious role, and you don't get 6 months, far from it, in this job now. So he knows full well. He's not come into this environment with his eyes shut. He knows he has to get results, and get results quickly, and for many reasons. And, quite clearly at this stage, that isn't happening. So something does have to change, and pretty drastically, I think. And his messaging after that press conference today, or in that press conference today after the game, was, for me, a head coach who understands that far earlier than he probably would have hoped he had to countenance. He's got to that point where, no, this needs to change pretty swiftly, otherwise he's going to be in the firing line, and probably the people above him as well.
Yeah, it's absolutely, and I think this is it with him, Sam, because I think lots of things. Clearly, we mentioned his track record. He is a fixer. You look at his teams, typically they have always kind of had slow starts. I think he had a slow start at MK and at Oxford and at Bristol City as well. You mentioned that sort of first portion of the season where it was quite unpopular, wasn't it? Him going in and replacing Nigel Pearson. So that was quite a slow start there. So this isn't completely new to him. Maybe the extent of it is, maybe the Carrow Road element of it is, maybe the pressure element of it is, but he is a fixer, he is a problem solver. It's just as Paddy said, it felt to me, sort of speaking to you guys and obviously listening to the back end of that press conference, maybe there's a realisation that there's quite a significant bit of work that needs to be done with this group at the moment from his perspective. Yeah,
I think there probably is, but that's where you kind of look back to the messaging in the summer and in his appointment, because as you say, he has kind of tended to start slowly at the clubs that he's gone into. Obviously at Oxford United and MK Dons particularly, he managed to get them going pretty quickly after that. But Bristol City, it certainly was a slow burner, a very difficult sort of first half. It was the second half of a season, but it was his first half a season at Bristol City, and then even last season they started pretty slowly before they ended up qualifying for the playoffs. So it comes down to how much Ben Napper wanted somebody who could come in and get results straight away, because if we're honest with the amount of mistakes that there are in the Championship, with how unpredictable it is as a division, some of the opposition who can kind of be pretty inconsistent, you can actually afford to start pretty badly and over the course of sort of 10, 15 games not pick up loads and loads of points.
Cov last season, exactly. Norwich the year before, and both ended in the playoffs.
City. Yeah. So you can do it, but the thing is, can Norwich afford to do that with the mood in the club? Bristol City, with all due respect, aren't a club who maybe have the same historical expectations in the Championship as Norwich. So although it will have been frustrating, and they probably would have hoped for better in the first half of last season, being mid-table as they were isn't a complete disaster, even if they hoped for better last season. Whereas being mid-table in the Championship for Norwich basically is a disaster. So I think what Napper had to do when he appointed someone in the summer was assess, okay, what's the impact of 6 bad weeks, if that's what it ends up being? What's the impact of 12 bad weeks? What's the impact if it doesn't really look like a very good team until the new year? And obviously he's assessed it. He's looked at Manning's record probably in much greater detail than most people have ever, really. And he's decided that he's the right man for the job. So I suppose for Napa and for Manning, it's about holding their nerve, because much as we saw with David Wagner's confidence about reaching the playoffs based on the experience that he'd had before, Manning will be looking at it going, he's had difficult spells to start off things at other clubs before, and he'll be looking at it kind of using that for confidence, I'm sure, and feeling that he can turn things around. So I think, it's about the extent to which Norwich are in a unique situation compared to those clubs. And for me, I think they are in a slightly unique situation, but also maybe that's the one thing that does kind of give Norwich fans hope. As difficult as that will be at this stage, and probably it is a little bit too emotional right now to assess things in those terms. Maybe in the next couple of days, if they're looking for some positives, they're looking for a reason to be a little bit more optimistic, they can look at Manning's records at other clubs and take some comfort from it. But the worry for me is that the context here is slightly different, and for all the reasons I've spoken about before in terms of the longer term worries, there probably is a bit more pressure to get things going at Norwich quickly. So it's the extent to which that frustration builds and then impacts their ability to kind of kick on after that, because even if the team technically and tactically improve a lot over these next few months, if they're in a position where fans are furious, the atmosphere at Carrow Road is horrible, it's going to be more difficult for them to then kick on and improve than maybe it was for Manning's teams at previous clubs. So it's kind of weighing that up. I think they do need to get some wins pretty quickly, and by hook or by crook, they need to win at Carrow Road, even if it's a horrible performance and a 1-0, because they need to improve that mood, because I'm not sure they are, even if it might result in playoff qualification. I'm not sure this is a fan base right now that has been given enough over the last few years to have the patience over the next sort of 3-4 months.
Yeah, I mean more generally on the plus, probably a separate point, worry about getting there first, but also like from my perspective, and this was a little bit Manning Bristol City. It's, for me, it can't be a lottery for Norwich City to get in the top 6. It can't be they get there, what a great achievement, but then get absolutely battered over 2 legs, a la David Wagner, because what's the point? If that's kind of the way it's going to go, they need to get there with a genuine prospect of getting there, and I mean or getting through them. Sorry, and I think the thing that Jack Stacey said post game, Paddy, was that they really sense an opportunity. You look at the Championship, there isn't. I know Middlesbrough have got 16 points and are unbeaten, and they've got past West Brom. We've obviously seen them in the flesh. I wasn't blown away by them, but clearly you have to respect the start they've had. To feel that opportunity is one thing, but then to actually seize it is another, and that is the next point. So the positive element is it's not that far into the season, but you kind of can't be waiting for too long, can you, until we begin to sort of see that turnaround and that opportunity taken.
No, I think I'm right in saying that kick-off today, ridiculous to be talking in terms of top 6 and gaps to playoffs, but they were only about 2 points off it, I think. I think Coventry were in the last position. Now, I know that, as I say, we're not even at the 10-game marker, which is most would suggest is the first time you start to really take any heed of the table, but equally that tells you that in terms of opportunity there is one this season. I mean, again, I've not studied this current weekend's round of games too closely, but before this weekend, you looked at it and Borough were probably the standout team, and I don't think they were necessarily, certainly not in a bracket of Leeds last season or further years gone by, the Wolves team under Nuno, and there was a very good Newcastle team. Standout Championship size. It doesn't feel that is necessarily the case this season, and maybe that averageness in one sense is probably which will save Norwich a little bit at this stage, while it is still so much of a work in progress that it's not going to be huge amounts of ground to make up. But equally, to echo what maybe Jackson inferred there post match, that if you're a player at a club in the Championship must make you feel this is an opportunity, because there isn't a clump of clubs who are on a different level to the rest But in order to get to that point, you would need to start seeing far more promise and potential in what they're striving to do, and that can change quickly. I mean, you lads have mapped it out there, right here, right now, an hour or two as it is after the final whistle, after another unconvincing, to be kind, Carrow Road performance. It seems a stretch to think they would go Stoke win, West Brom win, and then bounce into the Ipswich game. But it's not beyond the realms, because to cut to the point we're just discussing here, the Championship is that QPR get whacked 7 at Coventry and then come out and win the following weekend, I think, and have followed it up subsequently. So therein tells you the madness and the unpredictability of this division. So there's absolutely no reason that the die is now cast and this is now Norwich set for a season of mediocrity. Far from it. There's still elements of quality in that playing squad. I'm thinking, as I say that, the best number 9 in the division. Certainly on the early 11, it's one of the better shot-stopping keepers. So you could go through the squad and you could pick out players who are top 6 grade players. And again, the risk of repeating ourselves, a head coach who has got a team into the top 6, even if they, when they got there, as you rightly said, Connor, it was a bit of a mismatch against Sheffield United. But so it can turn. But at the moment, if we're talking about this could turn, it's more the hope rather than anything grounded in evidence or empirical evidence of what we've seen thus far. And that's the leap of faith that you're having to go on if you're in the media, or more importantly, if you're a fan of this football club at the minute. You're having to go on a bit of a leap of faith and a journey of, well, it could come together and we hope it'll come together. But you see that today. What is there evidentially in that 90 minutes today to give you any hope that this is a group of players under a head coach who are heading anywhere near to being in contention to the top 6? So that's the deficit at the moment. Yes, this season is still long and there's still plenty of opportunities for this group to become that top 6 genuine bona fide candidate. But, that is going to take a hell of a body of work to start to turn things around, because the early evidence is far from convincing.
Yep. Very quickly then, gents, to end the pod, let's kind of end it looking ahead a bit to that Stoke game. I mean, we could probably run through the team really, but in terms of changes, Sam, I mean, he kind of said in his radio interview that there would be change. I think it would be naive to think there won't be changes after what we saw today. Is it just the 3 that we spoke about earlier on? Is there anyone else you feel maybe comes into contention for that Stoke game, or maybe anyone who doesn't?
Yeah, that's a good. That's probably the better question. I feel like tactically they still really lack a kind of proper number 10 type to actually link the two, the midfield and the attack. I think even though Ante Cianats was kind of notionally in that position today, he was too close to Josh Sargent to really feel like a part of the midfield and to actually be a link between Maatsen and Topic, who are obviously more of those deep lying types than people who can go on and create chances for the strikers. So maybe a Marcondes, but maybe Schwartau would work in there after some pretty good signs today. I think Makama is a really interesting one, because I was saying to you earlier, I think he has done pretty well, and certainly at Coventry when Norwich were trying to just get up the pitch a little bit, add a bit of energy, relieve pressure to an extent. I thought he was good. Obviously today he gets his first goal for the club, but I wonder how that style will kind of look in a more compact championship game that's less broken down than maybe it has been when he's kind of been introduced, because I think if you've got a striker up there like him, you almost have to play in the same way that Rexom did with Kiefer Moore and kind of winning flick-ons and kind of doing that. Maybe he could do that with Sargent running in behind a little bit, but if Norwich do want to be a bit more dominant, as Manning says they want to, I'm not sure he gives you that much in terms of linking the play and kind of clever movement, and I just don't know if he's got that agility really. I think he's more suited to the role he's playing at the moment, so it'll be interesting to see if they put him in there. But yeah, it does feel after today's performance like most positions are up for grabs, and most players in that starting 11, if they do manage to retain their place, Vladan Kovacevic and probably Josh Sargent aside, and Jack Stacey, to be fair, I thought he was quite good today, then they've done it more out of a lack of alternatives than their own performances. Because I'd expect there to be a good few changes for Stoke.
Finally then, Paddy, to close the pod, and obviously we'll be doing one after Stoke, and hopefully we'll be basking in the glory of a brilliant win. And what a great win, what a transformation it's been to hopefully foreshadow that. What's the one big element of Norwich City at the moment in terms of the way they're playing that needs to improve, that needs to be different come next week?
Midfield. There's zero control or any build-up semblance of play, and you've got no chance. You've got no chance in this league if you can't control that area of the pitch. And control can be out of possession as well in terms of far more ballast offered to your back four. You see, I mean, as much as Cordoba's going to get it for goals 1 and 2, look at the central midfield failure to anticipate danger and go and close those players before they could pick out Kabari, was it, the right-sided player, very good player on that evidence today, although he won't have an easier.
Sure, he had to be. Really.
He won't have an easier shift probably in the Championship in terms of freedom and space that he was afforded, but nevertheless. But with the ball, primarily, when I go back to the midfield point, if you cannot have reasonable, and I think if you look at the possession, then it would show you today that Norwich had far more of the ball, but it didn't feel that was coming sourced from midfield control, and that's not to necessarily dig out Topic and Maatsen today or McLean when he's been in there, all right, but without that, then I think that is the key now to unlocking something in terms of this Manning template, because I keep ad nauseum in this podcast referring to his Bristol operation. If you go and see what he had in the centre of the park there, he had Knight and he had Bird, and they were two excellent operators who understood their roles and at Championship level were very good players. And afforded Bristol that platform. We've not had that from any midfield combination yet, and I personally think it probably is now leading to he's going to have to look at the system and the setup in there, because I just think the two are getting outnumbered too often. He's going to have to get another body in there for me, and that will have a knock-on effect for the top end of the pitch. But if you're constantly going into these Championship games and you're actually at a numerical disadvantage in that area of the pitch, is it any wonder that they're going second best, and then all you're then doing is increasingly inviting pressure onto your back four, and then there's bigger and bigger gaps to Sargent, Jurasek. You saw Jurasek today dropping so deep back into his own half to get the ball, and Jallo to an extent as well. It's disjointed for me because the midfield template isn't right at the minute, and that's personnel, but it's also structure, and that's where I'd be looking at in terms of the one thing that has to change pretty quickly moving forward.
Yeah, one thing's for sure, Norwich City have to find those answers and find them pretty quickly. I'm not sure if we've solved anything in this last hour or so, but I've certainly found it cathartic, so hopefully you watching and listening at home have as well. Paddy, thank you. Sam, thank you very much. Thank you all very much for watching and listening. We'll be back again next week, hopefully. Please let it be a win at Stoke. Thanks for watching. See you soon.